Hello and welcome to the studio. In today's film, I'm going back and looking at my Duncan's Behead print. I did an episode last week about adding tonal layers to the print, so do check that out if you haven't seen that yet. Today I want to do a little bit of final cutting, and then I am going to add the grass to this. So it's the last layer I'll be printing, and when you are working on a print, it's really important for it not to get clumsy, and the more layers you put onto a print, the sort of more potential it has to be clumsy. So I just want to show you how I'm going to deal with managing the inking so that everything stays naturalistic. The other thing is that I'm going to be dropping a green onto these cliffs, and I want these stones to look like they're sticking out of the grass. They've been there forever. It's all very natural. And when you are dealing with adding grass to a stony area, if you don't get it right, what it'll look like is that the stones and the grass don't actually join together, and one is floating and the other isn't. And it can look really clunky. So I want to show you with the inking later in the film how I'm going to kind of bed those stones down into the grass so they look natural. So I'm going to put this aside for a moment and get on with the cutting. Let's pop that over there. So the only thing, I've done a bit of cutting already, and I've cleared out the rocks here, so I've got the grassy areas to drop in. This bit here I'm not going to ink at all, but I haven't cut it out because it's going to act as a support for the weight in my press. So it's going to, when the press, the weight in the press comes down to take the print, keeping this area here will stop the weight tipping to one side and reducing pressure on this side. So this is not going to print, but it's going to be a balance to keep the weight in check. So I haven't taken that out. So the bit that I need to deal with is this part of the rock. So if I just put that back here, it's the stack here. So I need to just get the darkest shadows in. And I've been gradually cutting this away, and I'm using a little V tool. This is a file. This is the number 12, which I really enjoy using. And what I'm doing is thinking about where the light might hit this rock while I'm cutting away, and also about what needs to be emphasised and what needs to be kind of subtle. So I know that I want to get rid of the top edges and the bottom edges where the light will be hitting the most. So I'm going to lose those first of all. So basically these are not needed anymore because I want the light to, you want the shadows to sort of be darker as I go lower. So I'm just going to take that top bit out. And you can see I'm just using a wide gouge for that. And down at the bottom here, and I've got my print in front of me and I'm looking. Now, because I do this all the time, I can look at it one way around and think about the cutting in the reverse. If you struggle with that, the best thing is to just take a photograph of the work and then flip it on your phone or tablet, ideally, and then you've got a thing you can refer to that's in the same orientation. But as you get more used to doing this, you don't need that so much, and you sort of are able to do the flip in your head. So I've taken those bits out, and now I'm just working out what needs to go and what needs to stay. So here I've got a rock where I'm just going to, I want to leave a little bit of it, but I want to get rid of most of it. So I'm just going to work in the stripes that I've been using to describe this rock. So I've chosen this cutting in little stripy sections, and I've been very consistent with that because it's very structural. It's a very strong way of cutting. It's not actually particularly naturalistic, but I kind of like that. Okay, so again, I'm going to just start to chop away. And I also don't want to leave too many edges here because it can get a little bit too heavy. I've got dark edges, outlines in some of the areas, but I don't want it to become a kind of graphic device too much. So I'm going to get rid of the dark edges there. Just bring that down a little bit. And all the time I'm trying to think how light would hit. So I'm going to actually lose this bit here. So it's constantly just editing. And just going in for a smaller U-shaped tool. And I use the sides of the tool a lot, as well as the centre of the tool when I'm cutting. So when I'm coming up to the edge of something like here, I'm actually using the side of the tool. And it does become quite hard to visualise exactly what's going on when you get to this stage where it's just a sort of row of abstract shapes. So it may be a good idea just really take your time and take rubbings to see how you're doing. So that's just using a piece of thin paper and a graphite stick or pencil just to check how you're going along. Now there's not going to be a lot of contrast on the print when I print this final layer on these rocks. So this will be very hidden and subtle. You'll barely see it. And the fact is with a lot of my lino cuts that I quite often cut quite elaborate things that you kind of barely see. But it is important. It does make all the difference. It's sort of having them there but very subtle really works for me. If I'm quite prepared to cut something very complicated and then have it barely show, because it gives that depth. And I always love it when I'm watching people at an exhibition and they're looking at my prints and you can see them really, really looking, and you know that they've actually noticed that you've gone to all that trouble to do that cutting. That's always a lovely moment. I'm always very grateful to people who do that. So I'm really nearly here with this rock, and although I've got quite a lot of drawn details still left, I won't cut into all of it. I'm just going to finish off by giving a little bit of structure just down these darker areas, just to suggest the shapes of the rock rather than cut round all of the shapes themselves. So a couple of lines more, and I think we are about done. There we go. Okay, so now I am ready to print. I'm going to put my green grass in, and I'm going to finish off the darkest tone of this rock. So now that I've done the cutting, I'm going to do my inking. And over here on the slab, I've got 3 inks mixed up. I've got a green and 2 different tones of grey. And the green ink that I've got is very transparent. It's virtually a glaze, and the green is much brighter than I would normally use for a grass. I quite like, you know, sort of knocked back naturalistic colours. But here, this green is really quite bright, lots of yellow in it, very transparent, because it's going to sit on top of all those grey tones. And having the transparent bright green on top of the grey tones, the grey will knock back the green and give it all its shadow depth, while the bright green will show better on top of the grey. So I'm trying to prevent anything being clunky. If I mixed up a green that was the right colour for the grass, and it maybe had some white in it, and it was a sort of gentler green but it was more opaque, if I put that on top of those grey tones, it would look like the grass was sort of floating above the landscape. It wouldn't sit, whereas a thin glaze of brilliant green will bed down and look more naturalistic. You'll see what I mean when I come to ink it. So the other 2 I've got are simply greys. There is the darker grey for the stacks, for the shadows in those rocks that I was just cutting. And then I have a very transparent layer of the same grey. I mean, really, really transparent. And that's in case I need to drop in some extra shadows on the grass just to bed it down even more. So I'm going to ink up and show you the printing. I'm using these little wire rollers. They are very economical, and the reason that I'm using the little wire rollers is it's giving me a lot of control, because I want to ink specific areas now. So I've got this grass here on the hillside. This is the stack. And I also, while I think of it, want to talk to you about the fact that as I've been cutting away here, I've also been removing the liner. You can see with these paler areas, and I've just done it again here. I've chopped off this bit using a box cutter and then prized it off, because that gives it less risk of the inking up catching the edges and marking the print. So as I go, I'm just chopping away those excess areas. So I'm just going to work the green over this and check that I've got that sorted. Here I've got some rocks at the bottom which I'm going to want to do in dark shadow, and the grass starts down at the bottom here. So again, I'm using these little wire rollers. You do have to keep loading them with ink, but it gives me that control to keep that area uninked. And back again, and there's a little bit there. So you can see I'm just using the roller to give a nice sort of cohesive layer of ink there. And this bit's all sitting in quite dark shadow. So now to my dark tones for the stack. Taking care not to get any of this dark onto this green. fact, I have got a little bit there, so let's just correct that. And a little bit down there as well. And in that instance, I'm quite happy for the two to kind of run into each other slightly there. So here's the final bit of green, and the very, very transparent grey, I don't know I'm even going to need that, so I'm not going to worry about using that until I've printed this first hit of green, and then I'll decide whether there are some extra shadows needed or not. So just making sure that I've got fairly good coverage here, because it is sitting on top of an awful lot of ink. Okay. And as always, I'm just checking to see that I haven't got any ink where I don't want it. And back down with the registration. Just being very careful to make sure that everything is precisely in the right place. There are lots and lots of layers on this print, and the paper, although it's very good tempered, it does get pressed and sort of rubbed, and it can sort of slightly change size. So I'm always sort of aware of the fact that registration needs to be checked and then double checked. So here I'm not entirely happy with how it's going, and these are like tiny adjustments. I thought I had it all perfectly lined up, but now I've put it back down, I'm not so happy. So, you know, let's be careful. Okay, so I'm now going to put one layer of card in. In the last video, I had 2 layers of card plus the layer that's on there already. I'm going to drop the pressure even more now and see how it goes. I may need to add more pressure. We'll just have a little test. And of course, once you've worked out exactly what pressure you need, you can do the whole edition. It's just the first one that you need to test. Okay. So that is looking pretty good to me. I'm going to show you again properly at the table, but I can see up at the top here, it's okay. I mean, it's pretty good, but I think it could just be tickled up a bit with a little bit of grey tone in there. And it's a minor detail, but I think it will improve things. So I'm just going to do that. So I've got my roller here with very, very little ink on it at all. And what I'm doing is I'm tilting the roller slightly as I'm rolling out. And because the rocks have been cut away and are now voids or holes, if I tilt the roller, the ink just catches on the edges of the holes in the lino, exactly where there would be shadows if the rocks were there. So that's sort of super convenient. So now I've got the shadow in. and I'm going to try printing it without adding another sheet of paper at all. So just the one piece of card for pressure. So there's barely any pressure. Good. Yeah, that's done it. So now I've got the print completed and off the press, we can have a proper look at it and how that very transparent, very bright green glaze has translated onto the print. So all those layers of grey tone that I needed to build the rocks are actually anchoring that grass down so that it sits into that hillside in a very natural way. So you haven't got this like floating layer of green ink at the end that doesn't seem to sort of live with the rocks. Going a bit Bob Ross there, sorry. And up here at the top, I've just dropped in that darker tone using that little roller in a very thin layer and virtually no pressure on the press because it's subtle, but it's enough to suggest that there's shadows in the grass and some texture in there. So with the kind of landscape prints that I make, I spend most of my time trying to get the atmospherics right, trying to make rocks look rocky and grass look grassy and the whole thing marry together in the right light, in the right weather. So it's lots of thinking about stuff like that, which probably will be irrelevant to an awful lot of people watching this because you'll be doing different things. But I hope that seeing these last two films of Duncansby Head has been helpful in giving you some idea of how you might make a landscape look naturalistic. So I'm doing this as part of an amazing show that is coming up in January at the Horsebridge Arts Centre in Whitstable. It's been organised by Ben Dixon, who has got a marvellous lineup of printmakers, particularly Linocut artists. If you're interested in that, I'm going to put links in the notes below, and full details are also on my website. So thank you for watching this. If you've enjoyed this film, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for lots more printmaking. And I'll see you again soon.